Hello and welcome to Macroeconomics Module 11, Lecture 1. Our topic for this module is international trade. So this lecture is Introduction to International Trade. International trade is in Chapter 20 in our textbook. Worth noting only in the sense that last module we did not have any textbook readings. So now, to let you know, we're back into the textbook readings. And what we're talking about today, tomorrow, and today and next lecture, Lecture 2, is going to be covered in Chapter 20 of the textbook, so you'll read that. So the first thing, when you're talking about international trade, meaning trade with other countries, is to answer the basic question, why trade with other countries? Why not just make everything that we want here ourselves? And the answer to that is because when countries trade with each other, both countries can have more of everything. And I'm going to establish that or illustrate that fact for you through a numerical example. What you're looking at here is a table of possible production for the United States and Japan for producing wheat and for producing rice. This table should look vaguely familiar because long ago, back in the forgotten time, we started with these tables in Module 1 when we were talking about production possibility frontier diagrams. We built up production possibility frontier diagrams that illustrated tables like this. We're not going to be using the diagrams in this module, but we are going to be using the tables. So the U.S. can make either wheat or rice, and Japan can make either wheat or rice. And if Japan puts all of their resources into making rice, they get 90 units of rice and no wheat. If they put all of their units into making wheat, they make 30 units of wheat and no rice. And if they do half and half, they get 15 wheat and 45 rice. Now, if we look over at the U.S., if the U.S. puts everything into making rice, all people, all land, all machinery used to make rice and only rice, we get 30 units of rice and 0 wheat. If we do half and half, we get 45 wheat and 15 rice. And if we do all wheat, we get 90 wheat and 0 rice. So I hope it's clear to you looking at this that in some sense the U.S. is better at making wheat and Japan is better at making rice. And why would that be? It could be climate, it could be skills of workers, could be what their machinery is designed to do. For whatever reason, Japan's better at making rice than the U.S., and the U.S. is better at making wheat than Japan. But we're going to assume that these countries are not trading. Each country only has what it makes for itself. And the countries don't want to have only one thing. They like to be able to alternate eating wheat and rice occasionally. So that the United States is producing at B and has B. In other words, the United States is producing and has 45 units of wheat and 15 units of rice. Japan is producing at B asterisk and has 15 units of wheat and 45 units of rice. Okay. And you can read that off the table, and also the slide says that. So in this case, with no trading, a country only has what it makes. So now let's say that, with the whole Pacific Ocean separating them, the U.S. and Japan weren't trading. Maybe they didn't even know about each other. But now ships are crossing the ocean and they find out about each other. And the ships are capable of carrying wheat and rice across the ocean. This means the U.S. doesn't have to make its own rice. It can get rice from Japan. And that allows it to specialize in making only what it is best at making, which is wheat. And Japan doesn't have to grow wheat if it wants wheat. It can get wheat from the United States. This frees Japan up to specialize in making what it is best at making, which is rice. So the United States moves to point C on that table, which, to remind you, that was the point 90 wheat and 0 rice. And Japan moves to their point A asterisk, which is 90 rice and 0 wheat. And when the slide says, why couldn't they do this before? Because if they're not going to be able to trade, they didn't want to go to 0 production of a good that they desired because they wouldn't get any of it. So they had to go to B and B asterisk. Now they can go to C and A asterisk. And so what's happening now is after this production, the U.S. is sitting on having 90 units of wheat and 0 rice. Japan is sitting on having 90 units of rice and 0 wheat. And now they trade. So the U.S. trades 30 wheat to Japan for 30 rice. The U.S. has, they grew 90. They just traded 30 wheat away to Japan, so they have 60 left. And they're getting 30 rice from Japan. So they have that 30. So the U.S. has 60 wheat and 30 rice. Japan grew 90 rice. They traded away 30 wheat to the U.S. 30 rice to the U.S. for 30 wheat. So Japan has the 30 wheat they traded for, and they have the 60 rice from growing 90 and giving up 30. So as you see, the slide says, how does this compare to before the trade? Let me remind you, before the trade, the United States had 45 wheat and 15 rice. So now, in having 60 wheat and 30 rice, the U.S. has more wheat and more rice. And Japan has 30 wheat and 60 rice. Before trade started, where they were growing their own wheat and rice, they had 15 wheat and 45 rice. So Japan has more wheat and more rice than before they started. So you might think, well, if the U.S. has more wheat and rice than before they started, Japan's going to have less. But no, on the contrary, Japan has more wheat and more rice after trading than before trading also. So how does this compare to before the trade? The U.S. and Japan have more of both things. Now, where is this extra quantity coming from? That both the United States and Japan can have more of both things. And we're going to look at the answer in a second. I'm going to point out to you how similar this answer is to the answer we got back in Module 1 when we were talking about growing wheat in Kansas and building carriers in Maine. And the answer is that by producing our rice and wheat this way, we are producing efficiently. When I talk about efficient production, I hope that stirs vague memories of back in Module 1 talking about as efficient production to produce our aircraft carriers in Maine by shipbuilders and our wheat in Kansas by farmers. And inefficient production was to build our carriers in Kansas by farmers and grow our wheat in Maine by shipbuilders. And I don't expect you to remember the technical definition of efficient and inefficient, or that you don't, and I don't expect you to remember to be able to place them correctly on the graph. That was long ago. But the general idea that with efficient production, you get more of both things made. The key thing is by growing our wheat in Kansas and building our ships in Maine, we got both more wheat and more ships. And thus, the people of Kansas and wheat could have more of both things. And they could have more of both things than if Kansas tried to build both its ships and its wheat, and Maine tried to build both its ships and grow its own wheat. By the two states specializing in what they were good at, and then trading with each other, the people of Maine and the people of Kansas could have more of both things. That's exactly what's going on here. The people of the U.S. could grow their own rice and wheat, and the people of Japan could grow their own rice and wheat. But if we produce efficiently, the U.S. specializes what it is good at, which is wheat, and Japan specializes what it is good at, which is rice. The world production of both things rises. It actually rises from we were making 60 wheat and 60 units of rice. You can check that back in the very first part of this lecture when both countries were at B and B asterisk. We were making 60 and 60. Now with the U.S. and Japan specializing, we're making 90 and 90. That increase in production, 30 more units of wheat, 30 more units of rice, comes from producing these goods efficiently. And now it's just a matter, since the world has more rice than wheat, it's just a matter of the two countries getting together and agreeing on some sort of trade that leaves both countries with more of both things. And it doesn't have to be, what did we say, 30 for 30? 25 for 25 would have worked. 35 for 35 would have worked. And it doesn't even have to be perfectly fair. If Japan traded 35 rice away and only got 25 wheat from the U.S., Japan would still have more of both things and be better off than if they grew them themselves. The only thing you have to be careful of is, number one, the country doesn't trade away so much of the good it is producing than it has, so that it has less of it now than before it specialized in trading, and that the country doesn't accept so little of the good the other country is specializing in, so that it has less after trade than what it was making itself before trade. But as long as it does those two things, it's going to have more of both things, whether it's trades 30 for 30, 25 for 25, 40 for 40, 25 for 35. Okay. I'm going to talk about what happens to overall employment and unemployment in a situation like this. I do want to mention one thing before I get into that, and that is, you see from this discussion that the gain from trade almost isn't so much from trade, it's from, in the sense that if the U.S. and Japan just kept making 45 and 15 and then traded with each other, there's no way they could get more of both things. The advantage of trading is that now you can get things that you're not good at making from other countries. You don't have to make those things. You can specialize in what you're really good at. All the countries of the world can specialize in what they're really good at, and world production goes up. And once world production of everything goes up, compared to if each country was only making what it had, now you can get together and trade and have all the countries have more of everything. All right, back to talking about unemployment. What does this do to unemployment when countries trade like this? So think about what's happening in the U.S. We have half our resources going into making wheat, half our resources going into making rice, and now we're going to get our rice from Japan, and so we don't need to make any rice, so we can put all our resources into making wheat. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a lot more jobs in the wheat industry and a lot less jobs in the unemployment industry. In these particular industries, there will be definitely a shift in unemployment going up in one, unemployment going down in the other. But there's no reason this has to cause a change in overall unemployment. We should be able to gain just as much in additional wheat jobs as we lose in rice jobs. And thus what would happen in the U.S. is there'd be less unemployment in the wheat industry, more unemployment in the rice industry, and overall unemployment would stay about the same. And in Japan, there would be more unemployment in the wheat industry, less in the rice industry, and overall unemployment would stay about the same. So this slide says what I just said. Now, international trade is quite a controversial political topic. There are a lot of people who believe when we trade with other countries, we are losing jobs because we could have made those things here. So a couple of things to say about that. First, if I'm a rice worker in the U.S. and we start importing a lot of rice from Japan and I lose my job, unless I have the skills to make wheat, it doesn't help me that other people who are unemployed are now getting jobs in the wheat industry. I'm going to be upset that I see all this rice coming in from the U.S. and I lose my job, and I'd have to be more than human if I wasn't upset. And I say we got to stop importing rice from Japan so we can save the rice jobs. But I have to, well, obviously from those personal circumstances, I would be upset. From the overall viewpoint of economic policy, I have to be aware that as I lose jobs in the rice industry, I'm gaining jobs in the wheat industry. And so if we stop trading with Japan, The rice people get their jobs back, but then unemployed people who would have had jobs growing wheat, they lose their jobs and they become unemployed. If for some reason overall unemployment did go up, well, then we could use those things we've talked about in the whole rest of the class. If the government shouldn't just stand there and watch unemployment rising because of international trade, if necessary, they should use expansionary fiscal policy or expansionary monetary policy. If we're having unemployment problems, overall in the country it's rising. The problem isn't we're importing rice from Japan, unless I'm a rice grower, then I see that as a problem. The problem is the U.S. government is not using the proper macroeconomic tools that we've been talking about for a long time now to get unemployment down and get back to the natural rate of unemployment. Now, in this circumstance, we had the situation where the U.S. was better at making wheat than Japan was, and Japan was better at making rice than the U.S. is. But what if the U.S. was better at everything? What if we're talking about the United States trading with some country that's in some horrible climate and nothing grows, or at least very little grows, and they don't have industry, so they can make, they're not good at making anything. So the U.S. actually makes everything better than that other country does. Would we still want to trade with them? Well, that is the topic, or at least the starting topic, of lecture number 2. So if you're excited about that question, you can go ahead and immediately listen to that lecture. Until then, take care.